prophetic books of the Old Testament are scattered over a long historical period, from the 8th century B.C. to the beginning of the 3rd century B.C. These works, in other words, were not produced at one time, although the fundamental emphasis upon them and the springboard upon which most of them gradually developed was established in what is called the golden era of the prophetic writings of the Jews, which would be approximately the 8th century B.C. Thus we begin with the earliest books, finding such works as Amos and Hosea, certain parts of Isaiah and Micah. And we go on down through to the last of the prophetic books, which probably are Joel and Zechariah. Zechariah, by very content, could not have been written until not far in the beginning of the Christian era. Thus, the great span of the prophetic writings covers 600 to 700 years. And during this period of time, these writings pass through numerous modifications and changes. We should also note, in passing, that the earliest available manuscripts of the Jewish writings in Jewish already have the Masoretic point, or a comparatively recent form of diacritical markings, and do not date much earlier than the 9th century A.D. Prior to that time, we have only the great classical codices, most of which are in Greek. We do, however, have the Septuagint, the version of the 70, which is a very important earlier collection of biblical material dating from approximately the 3rd century B.C. But of course, this also is not available in its original in Hebrew. It comes to us along with the other translational sources of biblical material. We must, for a moment, try to define something of what the prophetic books are, what is meant by the word prophecy in this case. Here I think there's been a great deal of misconception. The prophetic books do not contain prophecies as we know or understand them. At least, if such are present, they are in a very small minority. The prophetic books have to do with one grand prophecy. And that prophecy is the restoration of Israel. Now, we will go into this a little later and try to show how this has implications. But for the moment, we can say that the prophecies of the prophetic books are much more on a moral level or on an ethical level than such prophecies and predictions as we would associate with Nostradamus or Mother Shipton or some of those whom we like to think predicted the future. The prophecies of the Old Testament are almost scientific prophecies. They are prophecies that seem to stem very strongly from a subconscious recognition of cause and effect. There are a great many of us today, for instance, who will say if certain things do not change, we must expect certain consequences. This, more or less, is the approach which we find in the Old Testament. It is not a case in which the prophet has announced some tribulation to a land or generation then unborn. The prophecies unfold, more or less, the fate of Israel, a fate closely linked to the conduct of Israel, and arising from the great Levitical foundations of Jewish law. In other words, the prophecies tell essentially what happens to the man who keeps the law and what happens to the man who breaks the law. And also what happens to a nation that keeps the law or a nation that breaks the law. Efforts to try to associate these prophecies, therefore, with later historical events involving other races, other nations, and other times represent a strong line of interpretation which is not entirely justified by the context. This brings us to the next point that we have to make. Any fragment of material out of context loses the greater part of its essential meaning. For this reason, the tendency to pick out prophecies or to try to assume that certain verses, certain chapters, or even certain books dealt with a particular event in some far time or distant place has a tendency to lead to what might be considered an uncritical approach to the text. It may satisfy an instinct of fancy or imagination, or may seem to be useful in supporting or sustaining a belief or an opinion, but we cannot say from the context of the books themselves that we have the right to assume that such was their original intention. More completely, we are more or less required to face the fact that these fragments belong to a distinct internal pattern, and that this pattern is very closely connected, hopelessly interwoven in the faith and development of the Jewish people. Recognizing the dates from the 8th century B.C. to the 2nd century, we realize that this period closely agrees with what might be termed the Great Tribulation of Israel. During this time, the people were under tremendous political strength. They were subjected to numerous indignities as a nation and a people. They watched the gradual collapse of the institution which had been built up upon the tremendous intensity of the Mosaic dispensation. They saw something which was of the deepest and most terrible concern to their hearts and souls, and we pray that we may never see the same thing in our time, in our day, or in the days to come. These people were firmly convinced that they were a good people, and the people up to the perfection of a great and good God, and that this great and good God was an all-loving, all-wise, and all-tender Father, were forced to face the gradual disintegration of their nation and their faith. They were forced to confront the definite factual evidence that they were miserable, that they were lonely, that their material affairs did not go well, that their princes and leaders were not always good men, and that by degrees a terrible disaster, a great dilemma was descending upon them, a dilemma which had also been shouted to them by their prophets and religious leaders. So out of context, we cannot estimate this situation. We cannot estimate the loneliness of these people. We cannot estimate the slender thread upon which their spiritual conviction hung. We cannot realize how sorely they were tried and tempted to depart from what they regarded as the ways of righteousness. They could not and did not see the evident workings of a good God. They did not see the divine intercession and protection for their people. They saw rather the structure which they had and their ancestors had built up slowly crumbling, gnawed away by the pagan world around them. Thus, in these prophecies, we find not only the stories of a people, and we find not only the message of God-inspired men, but we also see something of the humanity of the prophets. We see them as, particularly in the case of Jeremiah, we see a man struggling against his own unbelief. We see him trying to prove to himself first that this great spiritual dispensation was true. He had to fight this out. He had to look around him and see evil men flourish and good men punished. He had to see the law-abiding citizen impoverished and the deceitful and dishonest man flourish like the green bay tree. He had to, in some way, revive, restate, and restore his own faith. Yet to find this God in the wilderness and darkness of an uncertain time. It is not only in Jeremiah, but especially in this prophet, that we contact this tremendous internal struggle. We find it present in nearly all of the prophetic books, sometimes alternated with great moments of exaltation, until we dimly perceive human souls striving for their faith, struggling to keep their inner sense of the rightness of things. And also we see these old prophets inevitably assuming that their fellow countrymen were like themselves, under the same stress and the same strain and the same internal pressure. Thus the prophets are not only seeking to find this security in their own hearts for themselves, but when they find it, it flows out of them as a tremendous benediction to help those of lesser faith, to help to restore the realization of the essential nature of the great law, particularly the great Levitical statute. This is entirely based. For the prophetic words stand upon the strong foundation of the Pentateuch, of the revealed law, as it is given by the great lawmakers in the 5 historical and genealogical books attributed to Moses. This then causes us to make another little pause, which is essential to our picture, and that is to try to distinguish what the old Jewish people meant by a prophet. Now, this is a little more complicated than first appears. In the theistic system, political and religious, there was an element which is almost unique. Perhaps we should not say it is truly unique, because there are parallels to it in Eastern traditions. But certainly it is more peculiarly and remarkably emphasized in the Old Testament writings than in most of the other books. And this is the place of the prophet in not only the religious, but non-religious structure of his society. Perhaps it is easier to assume for a moment that in Judaism there is no clear distinction between religion and the non-religious structure of society. This may be formally true, but it is not factually true in experience. Actually, the leaders, both religious and temporal, had followings belonging to what we might term a laity, and these followings constituted the citizenship in comparison to leadership. The prophet was an individual upon whom the hand of God had rested. He had a unique position, and a good example is Samuel, who held in his own hand the power to make and unmake kings. The prophet was unique. The prophet was a person of heart. He was a person under the peculiar and wonderful protection of God. And it is interesting to note that in the very earliest writings, the name for this prophetic type of life was a very strange term which implied ecstasy and also madness. Now, among strange primitive people, we know that the mad are always regarded as under the protection of God. We know, for instance, that the epileptic was so also considered in the medieval world because of the strange attacks which came upon him. And therefore epilepsy was called a divine disease, the disease given by the gods. In a strange way, prophecy was a kind of a divine mania. It was something that all men could not have. It was something that set them apart and caused the presence of God to be strangely with them. This union between the prophet and his God gave him a strange aura of protection. He was almost immune to the vicissitudes of the world in which he lived. And it was his peculiar duty and responsibility to thunder out his warnings, his pleadings, always speaking as though speaking with the voice of the God of Israel. Thus the prophet, for the most part, was a protected man, protected from the strange destiny which set him apart and conferred upon him some wonderful internal power. But there were periods in Jewish history when it went hard upon prophets, and there are many of them that paid with their happiness and even with their lives for the duty which they felt to be theirs from heaven. The prophets usually descended by means of what is called anointing, and we will follow that thought a little later. Because you will remember that in the ancient ritual, Melchizedek, king of Salem, anointed the head, and in so doing bestowed the priesthood, bestowed the succession of divine authority. Thus we have the term anointing to mean the bestowal of the symbolic oil by which there was a baptism of the Spirit. In some instances, the prophets descended by this process of anointing, which parallels to at least a degree the general theme and concept of what Christendom calls the apostolic succession. It was a descent of prophets, a descent of divinely inspired persons, drawn and selected, often by their own predecessors, so that the prophet would choose one from among the people and bestow the power of prophecy upon him, lay his hands upon his head, and anoint him with oil, and dedicate him unto the living God. This we find also among ancient sects of other nations and among religious people generally. But in the case of the Jewish prophets, this descent of the prophetic power and this bestowal of the divine approval carried with it a powerful, forming political power, which is a little different from that which we generally observe. Usually the holy man departs from the world. Usually he reserves his prophecies and his mysticism for his disciples or those who are initiated into his sects or belong to the various schools in which he is associated. But the Jewish prophet was a man of action. He came out into the world and dared to hurl his reproaches even into the teeth of the king, even into the teeth of Solomon and David. And because of the tremendous moral power which the prophet had, particularly with the masses, it was very rare indeed that even the greatest of temporal rulers dared to go against the will of the prophet. Now the term anointed, which we find constantly in the Bible, also carries a two-pronged interpretation apart from this. Two classes of human beings were anointed in the biblical period, or at least according to the biblical record. Anointing was an ordination, a setting aside under divine favor. It could be bestowed upon temporal rulers. Thus David was anointed, and had great and wonderful authority because of this. Also we have records in the Bible that the anointing, or the term anointing, was often, or at least occasionally applied to non-Jewish peoples, because Cyrus, king of Persia, was referred to in the Bible as the anointed one. This is because of his peculiar charity and his kindly attitude toward the Jewish people, and the fact that through his liberation of the Jewish exiles, he was held to be fulfilling one of the prophecies, and therefore that he was the anointed of the Lord, or the hand through whom this fulfillment was to come about. In addition, therefore, to the religious group, there were these anointed rulers, or heads of various departments of learning, science, and medicine. They were all dedicated. Anointing in this sense carried the implication of dedication to a calling, to a high destiny, to a moral and spiritual integrity. Anointing also resulted in the descent of the traditional priesthood and the succession of high priests who passed through the ritual of anointing. In this way, their spiritual descent was attested. Thus we have anointing, or the setting aside, or the setting apart of mortals, in two different classifications. Both of these classifications, however, are closely interrelated, inasmuch in either example we have a human beings under the peculiar presence, protection, and influence of God, usually implying its use for the good and the preservation of the people. Now, these prophets and their various writings are open to some as to the authenticity of the names and the dates and the various parts of the text. Modern criticism is inclined to think that most of the prophetic writings are compilations. That is, that they are the works of more than one person. Each book is showing several different levels or layers of writing. These levels often indicated by dating, by the internal dating by events, which have since been chronologically organized and therefore supply the necessary keys to the time period. This is true in Isaiah, where we know that some parts of the work are much older than others. And we feel that the book of Isaiah, for example, shows about 600 years' work. Different parts of it having much later origin because of the different parallels and planes of contemporary events referred to. No individual could have been contemporary to all of these events. Thus, the prophetic books have certain changes within them, and the tone of the writings alter. The books of the 8th century are not identical in structure or in implication with those of the 2nd century. There is a gradual evolution and a growth in the prophetic concept itself as it relates to the mysteries of the Jewish people. Now then, let us take for a moment the general headings under which these prophecies can be divided, in order that we can get a little closer to the general theme itself. If you read the books carefully, you will see that the majority of the so-called prophetic works consist of several different types of attitudes, brought together in a pattern. The works flow from a simple and single concept, namely the possibility of the human being receiving a certain inner life, a certain internal apperception of the will of God. Events to come in the prophetic writings are not events more or less to occur by natural circumstances. They are the attitudes of God toward things over long periods of time. They are the will of deity being variously manifested according to the secret intentions and purposes of the divine heart and mind. So we find at the beginning of the prophetic work, the first and basic section nearly always are inclined or tempered to create the recognition of the omnipotence of deity, of the omniscience and omnipresence of a divine power. Thus they give us the broad picture of God's will for His people, and tell innumerable episodes and incidents relating to the evidences of divine intercession. They prepare the reader and the thinker for the grand acceptance of the destiny of Israel. That Israel was set apart, that the God of Israel was a righteous God, a God of His people. And we come directly into two terms with which we have a moment's pause also. We have a generally accepted term that we call monotheism. And we also have monothology. These two terms are essentially different in structure. Monothology is the belief that a people has a deity peculiarly known, that this deity is their great God and the source of their spiritual truth and security, that this is their peculiar God and He is the ruler of His people. Also, however, there is the concept that there may be other gods of other people, gods of strangers, gods to whom the believer should not give allegiance because they are not his own peculiar and particular God. Thus we have this basic concept as differentiated from ultimate monotheism, which is the belief in a twofold possibility. The first, that there is only one God, and that is the God of the people, the God of the race or the nation, or else that there is only one God, and other peoples and other nations worship the same God under another name. This leaves the primary concept of monotheism unassailed. There is this gradual drift in the prophetic writings from the standpoint of a basic psychology. The drift from the belief that there is a peculiar God for Israel and toward the belief that there is only one God, that this is the God of Israel, and under name or other form or symbol is the God of all men. This concept has a tremendous effect upon the visions and mystical experiences of the prophets, because it alters their entire approach to the basic concept of their religion. In this, then, we have the beginning of this prophet, and we divide it into three sections, as we said. The first, the glory of the divine plan for Israel. Secondly, the great tribulation, the fall of Israel, or its decline away from God. Now, when men are confronted with a very serious situation, when they pray earnestly and all their affairs go backwards, as Falstaff said on one occasion, when the prayers are not answered, or when it seems that the face of the Lord is turned from them, and that He removes His goodness from them, the individual is just simply faced with a situation that he must solve within his own nature, and this is one of the problems the prophets had to face. Because they were messengers and ministers of a deity whose benign attributes were not very often obvious, and much more frequently concealed under wrath and tribulation. But when a man who believes or is devout asks of heaven, and heaven does not answer, he has only two possible solutions. One, that God is wrong. One, that there was no God up there to hear the prayers, or that this God in some way was limited, was some way unable to serve His people. And this began immediately to detract from the glory of God. It ended in compromise of some kind. Either God was not good, or He was not God, to paraphrase a incident of the life of Buddha. And this particular situation could not be endured by a people. They could not turn from their God. They had no desire to do that. They had no instinct to do that. So they took the only alternative that there is, and that is they contemplated the possibility of their own departure from God. In other words, if God wasn't wrong, then He couldn't do it. If things did not work out, then men must be wrong. It was a comparatively simple premise. But, as is almost always the case whenever an individual or a collective becomes conscience-stricken, there is ample ground to justify such a belief. So as the thoughtful Jewish prophet began to meditate upon this mystery, it began to be clearer and clearer to his inner vision that Israel had fallen away from the Lord. He realized that there were great and wonderful men in Israel whom the Lord had wonderfully blessed. He had blessed Moses, and yet Moses made two or three very serious mistakes, which cost him his privilege and right to join the children of Israel in the promised land. And also the Lord had sent His wisdom and His great blessings upon David, king of Israel. But David was not always a good man. David did a number of things that excited and incited the wrath and reproach of Samuel the prophet. Solomon was a wise, wonderful, and good man, but Solomon also had moments of very distinct human weakness, and the possibility that man had departed from God seemed much more real, much more probable, and much more natural than that God had departed from men. And it did not take long for the prophet, looking upon the common people, those in their various walks of life, to realize that men were not perfect in the keeping of the Torah, that they did not obey the law in everything, that in their prosperities they forgot the law, and in their adversities they sought it again, that they did create a golden calf, that they did disobey, and that they brought tribulations and retributions upon themselves. Now this seemingly made good sense. And when it evolved as a pressure, undoubtedly a strong psychic pressure, within people in their great trouble and in their great trial, they began to see the possibility that their sufferings were merited. Now it also would be impossible, in the light of the Mosaic revelation, for man to assume that God would punish him without purpose. In other words, even in the age of the prophet, there was no concept that God punished men because he wanted to, or because he enjoyed it, or because he only wanted a certain parental despotism over his children. Such a thing was not conceivable. So we move almost immediately to one of the basic prophetic points, namely, that this procedure, this correction, this chastisement of Israel was for the purpose of bringing the people back again to truth, to the law, and to the prophets. That this was a punishment for their good, and therefore that they could be grateful even under suffering, and that they could be patient even under adversity, because they were being cleansed, they were being purified and redeemed, they were being brought back again to the law. Now this met part of the objection, but not all of it. And we find the book of Job standing out as an example of another serious issue which plagues the human heart, and still does, even to this day. And that is, why should great and continuous adversity come upon the good man? This was a bit of a dilemma. Here we learn in the prophetic book that Job, who represented certain of the aspects of the people, who had always been faithful, always been loving, always been kind, always been gentle, and had always loved the Lord with the fullness of his heart. Upon him came one of the most complete calamities imaginable. Now that this could be explained by a pact in heaven in which God and the devil sought for control over the human soul, this is, of course, the basis of the Faustian complex and the development of the great Faustian literature of Europe. But this was, again, the only solution that could be conceived, namely that this great conflict between the good man and the sorrows through which he had to pass were in some way the proving and testing of even the good man. The good man, in other words, apparently had to be better. More was expected of him, more was required of him. And the good man, to prove his goodness, must also pass through temptation. We find this taught again in the New Testament, where Jesus admonishes his disciples that they should not do good to those that do good to them, or do ill to those who do ill to them, for so do the scribes and Pharisees likewise. The great problem of the good man, therefore, is that he shall be able to maintain his goodness, that he shall be able to withstand pressure, because in the early part of the work, Job was comfortable. He had everything he needed. He was a superior and happy citizen. He was looked up to and respected, and therefore in him the virtue of the Lord was not perfected. It was necessary that he should maintain this virtue, even under the greatest pressures and tribulations, in order that he might be tested in all things and prove his devotion to the principles which he found easy to accept in times of happiness and security. So we find the prophet singing in this vein. We find a very interesting and involved development of this concept, of the explanation for the reason why certain awful and terrible things had to happen to Israel, such as the Babylonish captivities and many other disasters, ultimately terminating in the diaspora or the dispersion of Israel. This then becomes again a part of the prophetic work, the problem of man being tested. And prophecies relate to this testing and point out the numerous things which will arise, the numerous conditions which will come, in which the human being must be strong, must preserve his faith, and must maintain his integrity under any and all pressure. So the term of prophecy here is that all men shall be tempted, that they shall be lured away from truth, that they shall struggle against evil, that they shall go down like the prodigal son to the flesh pots of Egypt. But also in the prophecy they shall come back to their father's house, and for them shall the fatted calf be offered up. So we have this broad cycle of meaning, dressed in 1,000 forms, but always this one tremendous undercurrent, this stream of the divine prophecy, which is the prophecy of man, his need, his struggle, his wandering, and finally his redemption and his regeneration. And sometimes this is veiled under the name of a city, or veiled under the name of a nation, or under a hero, or some mythological being. But always it is the same essential story. The same story that we find in the wanderings of the tribes of Israel in the wilderness. It's the parallel, for instance, between the wanderings of Israel and the prodigal son, rather evident in this particular case. The children of Israel were led out of darkness, out of Egypt, the land of ignorance, the land of false belief. And they were led through the long desert of waiting, where they were tested and tried, and where they were nomadic and could have no rest. And the prophets cry out that this wandering in the wilderness is merely the story of man, the story of the collective search of the human being for those securities and that peace which cannot be found in this world. Therefore he wanders hopelessly, struggling on, led by spiritual leadership, creating his temporary temple, the tabernacle which he could make and unmake at his will and pleasure. He raised his altars and his monuments in the darkness, and continued his desperate struggle towards the promised land. And the promised land, of course, is always the land of spiritual security, the land of fulfillment, of peace, and of the fullness of all good things. And this is the prophecy of the prophets of Israel, that this land of promise shall come, that it shall fulfill and consummate all of the other works of men in the fullness of time. Now, when we go on with this, we observe several other interesting involvements gradually coming in. And these involvements represent the means or the machinery of the salvation, which is of greatest vitality. That Israel shall be saved was the burden of the prophet. But how? On this particular point, there was not as much clarity as perhaps the reader might wish. But here there are also guideposts. It is not a subject left fully neglected, but we see two lines of descent, of thought, clearly marked from the time of Amos right through Isaiah, down through Ezekiel, and through the lesser prophets, and all the way to Zechariah. Namely, that the preservation of Israel is due to the anointed. Now, in the anointed, we now come upon another term, and that is Messiah. We have here the Messiah, which also is a word meaning the anointed. In the old form, as the prophecies and predictions of the restoration of the congregation of Israel is unfolded, we had two parallel concepts of the descent of the power of the anointed. By the first of these concepts, the salvation of Israel rests in the descent of these prophets, who will continue and will periodically arise and will reveal the will of the Lord. And these prophets will continue to come, and some will listen and some will not listen. And there will be the dividing between the wheat and the chaff. and those who listen shall become part of the great body of the elect, the body of the mysterious overworld of Israel. Israel no longer a nation, but Israel is a symbol of world growth. In this field also, in this thinking, we see gradually the first culture hero of Israel emerging. We see, for example, the gradual focusing of attention upon David, king of Israel. Now, in spite of certain delinquencies on the part of David, he still was and remained for great length of time the great hero of Israel. He represented to the people a just ruler, regardless of his private and personal conduct. He represented also a strong and just man who maintained the law and kept the law and obeyed the prophets, and who maintained and preserved the house of the anointed and established the great Davidic line, which was to be the Messianic line of descent. It was therefore the opinion of at least part of Israel that the ultimate salvation of the people would come through the continuance of the line of David. That this salvation would be in the rising of a great anointed king, and that this king would gather up his people from all the dispersed parts of the world and should restore the kingdom, and that the house, therefore, that was set up by David should endure for 1,000 years and should rest in security and peace until the last judgment. Because according to the concept of this people, a concept which is in part derived from certain Persian origins, there is a distinct parallel in the final empire of the blessed, which is to endure until the final dissolution of the world and the ultimate destiny of all life in reward and punishment. This concept then becomes another element in the prophetic writings, because these writings gradually increase in their burden of the restoration of the kingdom of Israel. The second line of descent is a little different. For while it still maintains the power of the anointed, the Messianic concept moves down through not the rise of a temporal kingdom, but the establishment of a spiritual hierarchy, or a spiritual dispensation, that is to descend by a mysterious means, a means which is man himself. Thus we have the beginning of a mysticism in Israel, a mysticism which begins to flash through the prophets and their writings, and is carried on into the deep and beautiful mysticism that we find in the Psalms and Prophets. The Messiah, who is to come, is he to come to Israel, or is he to come to Israel? That was the great question, and it became a very important one. In other words, was Israel to look for a person in the form of a king, ruler of heaven and earth? Or was Israel to look for a release from within itself of the power of God? And that what was termed the Messianic Advent was to be the release of the power of God to all good men, regardless of their race or their nation or their religion. And that the release of the power of God might cause certain men to rise up, but that Israel, or the seed of Adam, the great composite humanity, was to be the body of the Messiah. This early thinking began to seriously color the beliefs of the Jews, and we see distinct evidences of it in the reports of the evangelists concerning the attitude of the apostles of Jesus in this particular matter. We know that some of these apostles distinctly believed that he was to be the historical and physical king of the Jews. And he rebuked them, saying that his kingdom was not of this world. Yet the same evangelists who accepted this rebuke also very carefully preserved the genealogy of Jesus from the house of David, indicating the general direction of the mind of the time, regardless of how we may otherwise wish to interpret it. But there is every reason to assume that the attitude of Judas Iscariot was influenced by his complete disappointment at the failure of the physical kingdom of Israel, which was to come, and toward which the Jews looked as a means of escape or liberation from the power of the Roman Empire. Thus, for the Jewish people also, the final tyranny of Judea by the Romans represented the climax and the final summation of all the powerful prophecies of the ancient prophets. Here was then the final tribulation, the most terrible burden of all. And under this burden and under this tribulation, we see again the tremendous resurrection or restoration of the primitive mysticism as sung by Hosea and Micah and the early prophets. In the early centuries, immediately preceding and following the Christian era, we observe, therefore, the conscience of Israel, going back to its prophets, still under the tremendous pressure of the great prophetic arc, because the power of this prophecy is responsible for something that is almost unique in world history. We have heard of many nations without religion, but we have been confronted in the Judaistic problem of the unique situation of a religion without a nation. We have found the extraordinary tenacity, the wonderful ability to keep something alive, although it has been scattered throughout the world. And this thing that has held it together and caused these people to be one people in their exiles and captivities has been this tremendous overshadowing of the prophetic books. It was this which made all their misfortunes and miseries part of a plan, so that each tribulation that arose was the fulfillment of something. But around the corner of this great pattern was a great fulfillment, the final restoration of the throne of Judea. This tremendous psychological pattern has therefore had innumerable consequences of influence and interest to practically all students of religion. In the early centuries, as we've mentioned, around the beginning of the Christian era, we see the rise of Jewish mystical sects. These mystical sects can be exampled by such groups as the Essenes, who are notable particularly for their simplicity and piety, flourishing around the Dead Sea, particularly in their old monastery or their old retreat at En-Gedi. We find in Upper Egypt the rise of a Jewish sect called the Prophetic, composed of an entirely different type of human beings, mostly professional men, doctors, physicians, lawyers, and others who had renounced what they had rather than giving up what they had not. Therefore, their contribution was a positive sacrifice. And the Prophetic were much involved in the deeper mysteries of life. We also have the gradual ascendancy of the Syrian Gnosis under Simon the magician. We have the constant references to the influence of Neoplatonism, Neoplatonic philosophy in general, Neo-Pythagoreanism, and to a degree other cultism of Eastern origin, breaking in upon the polyglot of the Jewish melting pot at Ephesus and in areas of North Africa. Here we find a very powerful mystical tradition growing up, perhaps best expressed through the writings of Philo-Judaeus. Here we have a true mystical approach to the entire problem. Here we find the Jewish writer beginning the problem of interpreting, creating tremendous symbolic pictures, and using essentially the key of Neoplatonism to accomplish a great synoptic concept, a concept of all religions being united underneath the various symbolisms with which they were outwardly adorned. We find tremendous transcendentalism creeping in to the Jewish situation. This, of course, intensified by the diaspora, or the scattering of Israel and the destruction of Herod's temple. By this time, the fall of Israel was complete, and the scattered and wandering peoples began the process of their spiritual rehabilitation under some of the most trying and tragic situations recorded in human history. This means also the gradual rise of a positive attitude in Jewish mysticism itself. This attitude is perhaps best exemplified in the writings of Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, or Maimonides, the great Jewish scholastic who so heavily influenced the thinking of Albertus Magnus and St. Thomas Aquinas. Maimonides took a very simple and rational situation or position in this matter. He declared that the prophecies of Israel indicated one thing and one thing definitely, that there would be a restoration of the Jewish state in Palestine, and that this would be the herald or announcing of the coming of the new or Messianic dispensation. That the restoration of the Jewish state was not to be considered from a political standpoint, or as Maimonides rather plainly put it, it would allow these people to have the protection, freedom, and security in which they could devote themselves constantly and continuously to the study of the Torah and the perfection of the law and in the service and improvement of their fellow men. So Maimonides had this very definite belief that there would be a restoration of Israel in Palestine. This also, of course, as you can well understand, became a powerful impetus behind the Zionist movement, and finally, undoubtedly, contributed heavily to the creation of the modern state of Israel. All these things must move along, spurred and inspired by this mass of prophetic writings, because the great prophecy of the prophets is fulfilled in the restoration of the Jewish state. This was the point upon which they were most insistent, and upon which a very large part of their doctrine depended. Now to return for a moment to the life and consciousness of the prophet himself and the experiences in which he passed. We observe in the writings and in the commentaries and in some of the more modern or medieval texts something gradually emerging as to the power or possibility of a relationship between God and man. The prophets were well aware of the fact that the salvation of the race could not be achieved merely by an sent prophet, one at a time, over a long period of time. The prophet was therefore a symbol, as well as a person. He represented a state of consciousness, a state of existence. And this state was the one which might be termed obedience to God's will. And therefore, the entire secret of prophecy moved from obedience to God's will. It therefore inevitably must follow that the art, the science, the means, the method for this obedience should be cultivated as one of the deepest and most important philosophical doctrines of the Jewish people. Next week we will consider some aspects and phase of this doctrine as it appears in the great concepts of the Kabbalah and the Mishnah. But the moment it is enough for us to point out that the prophet, through a series of experiences, like the mystics of Islam and other groups, came into the knowledge or the internal conviction of the availability of the divine presence. The prophet knew that some human beings, at least, were able to transcend their own humanity and to attain to a more intimate knowledge of the will of God. This, obviously, was the most important work that man could do, because it was necessary to his salvation, not only that he be good, but that he should know what goodness is. Not only that he should obey, but that he should know what he obeys and why he obeys. These answers, these basic answers, must lie in himself, and in his direct communion with a spiritual source superior to himself. Thus in the prophet we have the beginning of the concept of how men can reach God. And as this concept relates to the needs of the Jewish people. We have then the basis of what constitutes man's way of reaching God. And we look down the list of the prophets, and we see what they were. And we look again down the list of the apostles, on the disciples of Jesus, and we see what they were. And as we look down the list of the prophets, we find that one was a shepherd. Another was an agriculturist. These prophets all by profession or by craft belonged to the simple ways of life. They were drawn from their fields. They were taken from the houses of their fathers, anointed and set apart to the service of God. There is very little indication that these prophets were men profoundly or particularly learned in the formal ways of knowledge. They were possessed by a spirit, and it was therefore obvious to them that this power of God came not just to the learned or even just to the wise. It could come according to the will of God and according to the bestowal by divine intercession and favor. The prophet then began to consider this problem. Can he or could he find God? And he came up with a negative answer. No, he could not find God, but God could find him. It was a different position entirely, one of much greater humility, one of resignation. And then came the way of the finding of God. The moment the thought of how shall we find God struck him, he went back to the Levitical code. The laws of Moses were the way to find God. And this finding of God through the prophets meant obedience to the divine law. Meant that the individual should keep faith with God. This was the great requirement. And then he should practice his faith. That truly words without works were dead. And that claims to power, authority, and distinction, and the assumption of power meant nothing in the terms of the divine will. Thus we have the true mystic attitude rapidly taking form, namely the complete resigning of the soul to God, and the gradual departure of man from worldliness, the gradual acceptance of aloneness, the gradual power, most of all, perhaps, to experience God in adversity, to see the wonderful and beautiful workings of God in those things which are difficult, tragic, or mysterious. The final proof, the testing of the prophet, was his ability to survive without question, without doubt, without irritation, without rebellion. And his reward was that he could know God. This way, as practiced and exemplified in the prophetic books, gradually came nearer and nearer to the minds of the people, and resulted in the rise of such mystical movements as the Gebers and the Johnanites, and all of the mystical sects which were flourishing in the beginning of the Great Future. These mystical groups were consequently mostly of a very humble, a very gentle, and very retiring nature. Now here again we have to divide our path between what can be historically demonstrated and that which falls distinctly under the level of tradition. About the 16th century, or the latter part of the 15th century, a great Jewish book appeared in Europe, which was to have a profound effect upon the thinking of the Jewish people, and that was the Sefer HaZohar, or the Great Book of Miscellaneous. This book was completely and almost entirely mystical and allegorical. It was the tremendous expansion of every prophetic and extrasensory experience of the Jewish people. This work is supposedly, or is attributed, at least by legend, to Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai, who lived during the reign of the Emperor Vespasian. He was exiled, cast out, and a price was placed upon his head by Rome, and he retired to a cave in the wilderness. And he had no clothing but earth with which to cover his body, and there he remained alone in meditation, and gradually drew a few disciples around him, and there in hiding he received the spirit of prophecy, and the presence of the Lord was with him. And Simeon ben Yochai compiled this wonderful work, which is called the Books of the Greater and Lesser Holy Assemblies and the Related Matters of the Zohar. This book had a very deep and moving effect upon Jewish thinking for a great many centuries. And although it was never regarded as an orthodox work, it shared with the writings of Rabbi Akiva a great deal of prominence and popularity. It again was the pressure on and on toward the purely mystical. Now we can parallel this also in the rise of early Christianity, because during the period of the great persecutions of the Christians, we find also the rise of a great mystical concept. a mystical concept which was again revived in the decadence of Christianity during the Dark Ages. So when Christianity began to develop bad conscience, it did exactly the same thing that the Jewish prophets had done earlier. And from the 12th to 14th centuries in Europe, there were men, prophets, walking up and down the countryside year after year, crying out that the punishment of the Lord was at hand. And in some parts of Europe, flagellant groups developed that wandered from one country to another, lining the roads with the bodies of the dead and the blood of flagellants. And during this great period of repentance, it is quite probable that several 100,000 persons beat themselves to death out of fear that they had offended God. And their consciences were just bad enough for them to have some ground for that anxiety. But out of that anxiety came also the great cry that we heard at the beginning of the Christian year, voiced by John the Boy in the wilderness. Prepare the way of the Lord and make his path straight. Repent your sins and give yourself to truth and God. The prophets of the 8th century B.C., faced with the captivities and exiles, cried this. Those of the 1st century A.D. cried the same. Those of the 12th century cried again. And now in the 20th century we hear whispers of another cry rising. Namely, that the human being who passes through these periodic revulsions against his own mistakes and resolves in some tremendous effort of his own spirit to restore that which he has forfeited, destroyed, or compromised by his own misconduct. The possibility that such restoration is possible, that it can be accomplished, that it may be done, also, of course, is the great open hope which lies in most of the prophetical thinking of ancient people. And we have to proceed a little bit as to what the concept of this better world to come really was like. If we follow one Jewish line of thinking, we come to the millennium, or the golden age, the age of truth and peace for which all men long and yearn within themselves, especially as they suffer here. The rulership of this state is in the hands of the Messiah King. Now, the Messiah King of the prophets, the Jewish prophets, is not essentially different from the philosopher king of Plato. In fact, there is some indication of borrowing by the Greeks from the Semitic tradition at that period of time. The Messiah King, or the philosopher king, is the king who rules in the righteousness of God, and who rules as the servant of God, and whose government and reign are completely dominated by the Torah, or the law. And he rules over a people who in their own hearts have been restored in faith, therefore that they live together in peace and happiness and security. So in the earlier pictures we get some concept of this. We get the dream of the day to come, when the lion and the lamb shall lie down together and the little child shall lead them. We get the concept of a great security in which every creature in nature, more or less, combines in a fraternity of brotherhood and love. This is the golden time we look for. This is the golden age of the prophets. And while they conceived of it largely as the reward of Israel, even their own best thinkers have been prone to regard it as a symbol of a collective good for all mankind. A good in which men shall outgrow evil and shall outgrow sin and death, the last great enemies that men will call us. To achieve this, there is only one possible way, and that is through witnesses and through the testimony of the Spirit. Now, the prophets were witnesses, and they bore evidence to the fact that man can know. That was one of their primary duties. Their prophetic statement was that because man can know, he must and will know. This was the inevitable outcome of the basic concept. So we find the testimony and the arrival of the concept of the scapegoat. And we find it fitted into this messianic picture or pattern. Men must deserve the golden age. We cannot be deserved for them. The Jewish concept does not, as I understand it, basically conceive of the forgiveness of sin. Other words, it does not conceive that salvation is by forgiveness primarily. Salvation is by good works. The individual must not just be sorry for what he did wrong. He must do what is right. He must earn by the positive statement of his ability to perform constructive action even at the expense of pride and self-will. Thus, the coming of the golden age must be through the people. It must be because the average human being in his heart has learned to love the law. And this more or less coincides, for example, with the concept of the golden age or the coming millennium in Buddhism, in which the Bodhisattva Maitreya used to appear as the blessed and desired of all nations. And the same concept occurs in Islam, with the advent of Ahmed, the beloved of all peoples to come. Thus, the advent of the Messiah implies in the mind of Israel that there shall be a worthy kingdom over which he shall rule. In other words, he is not going to come and bring order out of chaos. He is not going to come with a sword in one hand and the book in the other and perhaps with force or with great power cause this reformation. He is not going to stand in clouds of glory so that no one will dare to disobey him. He is not going to come with the flail of the crook of the ancient Egyptian hierarchy. He is to come for the throne that has been prepared for him before the beginning of the world. He comes to the throne of David which man himself has built. Therefore, there can be no golden age until men have merited the coming of the Messiah King. This meriting is not to the individual. And we move the entire concept of human society onto a different level. In Israel, the original concept was that there is no salvation for the Jews. There is a salvation only for Israel. That the individual achieves not for himself but for all. And he fails not for himself but for all. In other words, the weakest man in Israel is the failure of Israel. By distinction also, the strong man in Israel contributes something to the strength of all Israel. Thus, the virtue of the good man does not save him, but contributes to the common good of all men. And it was inconceivable, apparently, at the time of these prophetic writings, that any individual could go to heaven and enjoy himself, knowing that everyone else was not there. This was a very interesting point. In other words, we had an epidemic of theology at one time in which it was actually taught by dear old Jonathan Edwards, one of our real hellfire damnation preachers of New England, that families would love to stand upon the bridge of heaven and watch their loved ones screaming in purgatory below, and the ones above would be singing hymns of praise to God. Well, this does not fit into the messianic concept of the old prophets. They could not conceive of this. Perhaps it was because of the peculiar clannishness of the people, perhaps it was because they had suffered together so much. But their concept of suffering together implied their hope of enjoying it together. It was a communal thing rather than an individual thing. And the peace of man was to be a collective peace, because no man could have peace if others did not. He could not find any satisfaction in being the one good man in the world. He could not find any happiness knowing that those whom he loved, or even those whom he did not know, still suffered in ignorance. This, incidentally, is a very deep mystical tradition, and it finds itself, of course, well stated in the northern or Mahayana school of Buddhism, where the Bodhisattva renounces the nirvana and takes the oath of the great sacrifice, in which he affirms that he will not enter into peace until the least of creatures can go with him. This is also an essential part of the old messianic concept of the kingdom of Israel to come. Namely, that it must be all the people. That it must be the fullness and happiness of Israel. But that this happiness is made possible by individual action. That this happiness means sharing. And even the old prophets said something that we haven't realized much today, and that is competition is not the life of trade, it is the death of the trader. Cooperation is the life of trade. And it interferes with the temporary passing concept of the profit system as we know it today. Actually, the advancements of all great causes must be through common effort. And certainly the cause of wisdom, of truth, and of reality are great causes. And these causes depend upon the greatest possible human united effort. So in this concept, we find that the growth of the individual is tied closely with the growth of the total group. For instance, the idea of sharing and giving is very strongly present in most of the old Orthodox Jewish communities. They gave of what they had. They had a ritual in which a living man gave a day of his life or hours of his life to another in order that that other person might live longer. They actually had rituals for that purpose. It was a part of their concept that in some mysterious way each one could give to the other. In the Messianic way, then, of this approach, the salvation lies in the regeneration of the total humanity. And this regeneration of the total humanity can only come as a result of man's personal experience of the immanence of God. This total experience, as even the old prophets realized, is difficult to man in prosperity. Therefore, this became the justification for the great adversities of the people. It was evident that in their troubles they came together. In their troubles they found generosity, they found friendliness, they found sharing, they found sacrificing. And in a strange and mysterious way, these were the glories that shone through tribulation, and made tribulation more wonderful, more beautiful, more real than the greatest joy and security. This follows naturally in the thinking of the people even now. And the dream of the better day to come, while it differs with different sects, still I think it is probably rather well summarized in the findings or opinions or the platform set out by the liberal and reformed Jewish rabbis in this country in 1937, when they stated that it was their historical task to work together with all men of good principle and good hope for the restoration of the peace, and the sharing of all good things, fellowship, friendship, and mutual esteem and regard, and that this labor together must end finally in the fulfillment of the Messianic purpose. So that the Messianic purpose in Israel is the purpose of man building a godlike world, and that when he has built the temple according to the law, the living God will dwell therein, and that when man has built a society worthy of the presence of truth, truth will come and live in it. The truth will not save him in his errors, but truth will crown him in his virtues. That he does not use truth to escape ignorance, but uses or receives truth when he himself has overcome ignorance, as has restated the great essentials of life. This, while we may or may not agree with it completely, is certainly a very noble, very positive, very constructive attitude toward the mysteries of life. We should also bear in mind that while the legends are comparatively inadequate, and we must depend very heavily upon something which I have said upon with great reservation, and that is interpretation, that there was, traditionally, a body of knowledge which paralleled the general teaching of the people, even as far back as the time of the prophets. This is quite conceivable inasmuch as it is assumed that Moses was learned in the wisdom of the Egyptians, and very definitely may have been aware of the Egyptian secret systems of education. He had been adopted into the household of Pharaoh, which gave him advantages and would have made him eligible to the mysteries of the priesthood. We know, for example, that the Ark of the Covenant was patterned almost exactly from the Egyptian Ark on the proud walls of Philae in Egypt. We know also that a great deal of the prophetic writing is based upon the earlier Egyptian records. And there is every reason to assume and suppose that there was a division of knowledge among the Jewish people, and that certain knowledge was available to certain groups, even as much as in the caste system of India, of ancient India. By this we know that the tabernacle of Israel was divided into 3 rooms, or 3 parts, of which the outer was the outer court, where the people of the 12 tribes would gather and bring their offerings to the altar of burnt offering, or bring and place their bitters in the labor of purification in the courtyard of the tabernacle. This place was therefore the symbol of an outer world, and to a great degree it was the symbol of the Torah, the body of the law. Then there was the holy room, the larger and outer department or compartment of the tabernacle itself. The outer room contained the altars of the shewbread, and it also contained the 7-branch candlestick. And here was also at the rear, and dividing this room from the sanctum sanctorum, or the Holy of Holies, was the altar of burnt incense, upon which, or from which perpetually a pleasant aroma unto the Lord ascended. This room was accessible to the priests, and here we have the room of the second doctrine, which was the Mishnah, or the soul of the law. The Holy of Holies, or the inner place, which contained the ark, the chariots, and originally was supposed to have within it the tablets of Moses and the budding rod of Aaron. This wood, this mysterious box of Shittim wood, overlaid with gold and carried upon staves in the wilderness, was the mercy seat, or the place of the Shekinah's glory, where the Spirit of the Lord hovered. And here only the high priest of Israel could enter. And before he was permitted to enter this room, he must remove all the garments of glory, for he might not wear any ornament, decoration, or symbol of temporal authority or power in the presence of the Lord. And before he could enter this room also, he had a rope tied to one foot, so that if when he entered into the holy place there was an evil thought in his heart or mind, and God struck him dead, his body could be drawn out of the room by the rope, because no one else could enter to take it out. This Holy of Holies, therefore, the abode of the cherubs, whose wings met upon the mercy seat, was certainly to be compared to the most secret and hidden mysteries of Israel. And to the cabinets of the medieval period, this was the Kabbalah, or the unwritten law. The law which belonged only to the Hasidim, those who had received the mysteries that had been advanced in the secret arts and sciences. Later, this lore and the wonder of it was said to have been passed into the keeping of Solomon, king of Israel, who became master of the world, who became master of the spirits and of demons and of all the mysterious creatures of nature. And there are many legends relating to this in the Arabian Nights everything. But there were the vestiges of these 3 levels of doctrine and belief. And we know without any grave doubt that the deepest and darkest and most mysterious of these doctrines dealt with man's internal disciplines and the ways in which he could be brought into a conscious identity with the mystery of God. These secret teachings were reserved not physically for the high priest of Israel, but mystically for those who had been anointed, who had received the call, and who had known that they were taken out of the world to become the servants of the living and eternal God. Thus, even at the time of the prophets, we may be quite certain that double meaning is involved in the writings, and that these writings, therefore, have a larger context than might first and originally appear. If, therefore, we do join a little bit with the mystical speculations of the Jewish and Christian Kabbalists of the medieval period, and try to unfold a little according to their concept some of this esoteric phase of the matter, we should not be held as differing in spirit from the great students and scholars from among the Jewish people themselves. For all of these things were part of their way of speculation and of life. The darkest or most hidden parts of this speculation, therefore, dealt with the release of man's spiritual power. Really dealt with the creation of the God-man. And in the case of Israel, the representation of this was enlarged. We had in the medieval period a system of doctrines of interrelated beliefs, which referred to a macrocosm and a microcosm. This theory went out of fashion with the development of modern science, but it has still been cherished as a part of old mystical speculation. In this doctrine there are two worlds, the great world and the lesser world. The great world is called in the Zohar the macrocosmos, or the great face. And the lesser world is called the microcosmos, or the lesser face. And these are the two faces of God, the superior and the greater face, and the inferior and the lesser face. In the development of the concept, man became identical with microcosmos, or the lesser face. Man, in other words, was the miniature. Man was the small concentration of the entire divine mystery. So as the old mystics used to sing, these three books by which man may know the universe. The first is his own body. The second is Holy Writ. The third, the universe itself. These were the three ways or three books by which man could read the mystery of existence. Now, macrocosmos, or the macrocosm, was always the collective. And we think a great deal of how God made man in his own image. We think a great deal of how the universal energies, resources, and powers are focused upon man, so that he possesses within him the infinite potential of all knowledge and all power and all good. The Jewish mystics seem to have followed an inclination of theirs and reversed the process. In other words, instead of thinking of how much man has received from God, the Jewish mystic takes the attitude that the microcosm represents the individual and the macrocosm represents the collective. In other words, that the individual and the collective are bound together by this strange and mysterious tie. That all things that exist in particular in man exist in general in all mankind. And that therefore it is not necessary that man should bear witness to the collective, but it is also possible that the collective can bear witness to the individual, which is the alternation of the polarity of perspective. Therefore it is the collective that bears witness, and this collective being the work of men, considered as a totality. The collective forming the great environment in which the individual exists and with which he must make his adjustment and to which he must pay a strange, mysterious devotion regardless of its limitations or its inadequacies. Thus, the power of deity, being universal, is reflected downward into the most universal concept of man possible, and that is the collective. This collective in the Jewish thinking undoubtedly gradually becomes identified with Israel. Israel is not a nation any more than Adam is man. Israel is the collective. It is humanity. Even as Adam represents the primogeniture of the human race. Adam is a plural word, meaning the species, the kind, or the type. A creation. Adam Kadmon, a creation formed of the red mist of space. In the collective, then, we have the concept of Israel as a being. Israel first as a patriarch, then Israel as a nation, and finally Israel as the world. Therefore, the salvation of Israel is the salvation of the world. The tragedy of Israel is the tragedy of the world. And this tragedy implies a great deal that many individuals should think about. It is the tragedy of what we term a motion temporally successful and ethically a dismal failure. It is a motion in which man, seeking his own advancement as an individual, has sacrificed the collective, which is the symbol of God among men. Here we can go right back to Oriental thinking again. You have a perfect parallel of it in the Vedanta system. On one occasion, the Swami Vivekananda was once observed to be weeping softly, and someone asked him what was wrong. He said nothing was wrong with him, but that he was just sharing in the sorrow of another who was his other self, and that he had experienced within himself the pain of a person he did not even know. This concept would be very consistent with this idea, this very strong, positive, and rather cataclysmic idea. Namely, that the proper symbol of God in society is not man, but society itself. That God is not just one. God is one in many. Man thinks of the oneness of God as being focused into himself as one. But God is infinite, and the collective becomes the best and most natural symbol of infinity. Thus we have the tremendous need of the individual to keep faith with God by keeping faith with the collective, not just keeping faith with himself. If he keeps faith with the collective, he cannot break faith with himself. We find the same thought again in Kant's categorical imperative, which he more or less advanced as his concept of a reformation of the Golden Rule. Namely, that every man should so conduct himself that if every other man behaved in the same way, everything would be good for all. In other words, he restored the concept that an individual should conduct himself in such a manner that if it was collective conduct, it would be good. This throws the weight to the collective again, you see. That the individual who injures the collective injures both himself and his God. That the security of the collective is indispensable to the security of the individual. Here we come down to some rather solid political thinking. And we come to a problem that is being divided and torn today. Namely, is man created for the state, or is the state created for the individual? Now, in our democratic concept, we believe that the state is created for the individual. But in the Judaistic concept, we would be asked to think this through. Not necessarily in the terms of the individual becoming the servant of the state and being dominated by some tyrannical despotism on a political level. Certainly not that at all. But is the individual made for his own good and his own good only? Is he made to live and die, hope and fear, save himself or lose himself, as a single unit within a construction, and with no responsibility to the rest other than such responsibility as he may voluntarily choose to assume? Is he created under a system in which the purpose of the state is to create an environment suitable for his happiness? Or is he created with a responsibility to create a state suitable to his own good? You see, we get into a rather dangerous point here, and yet we get into a very fundamental point of rabbinical law. And I don't think we could entirely disregard the position of the Jew, the philosophical position, if we approach it on a level comfortable with his thinking. If we approach it on a strong political level, we would certainly differ with him markedly. But if we recognize that the increasing growth of man is witnessed by his increasing value to all, I think we have a very balanced position. In fact, we have a position that the man of good spirit almost instinctively assumes. Very few good people are satisfied simply to be good, or to hope for their own salvation through goodness. In fact, more and more it becomes a moral duty of the individual to share good, and to serve in any way possible the common needs of his fellow men. I think we can note this in our public life today, but I think it is particularly noted in the Jewish community, where there is a tremendous determination to preserve the unity of the people and to take care of the problems which arise within that community and to take care of them adequately. This is an important point because it again emphasizes the fact that the individual exists for the common good. Not as the servant of others, but as the server with others, for principles upon which the state itself must stand. This follows another point, and it's a very good point. And that is, namely, can the state reform the individual? Can the state force good laws to make good men? Can the state become so sufficiently prosperous or so abundant in everything that all men will be good? Can the state remove so many problems that man without problems will be happy? The old congregation of Israel said no. But individuals that cannot be made happy in this way. And Maimonides also points out that happiness comes from within. It comes from the individual realizing not his opportunity alone, but that opportunity is his responsibility, and vice versa. Therefore, that his happiness lies in seeing the common good flourish around him. Because under this common good, his own security is inevitable. Whereas if he thinks only of his own security, he will place himself in a civilization of unregenerate beings so completely inimical to him that he cannot be secure, no matter what he has. This all has a bearing upon our subject because it restores to us the concept of the final messianic dispensation and what it means. It brings all of the teachings and writings and beliefs of the prophets into sharp focus of the termination of this great cycle in which the diaspora is over and the peoples return again from confusion to faith. The scattering of Israel is the scattering of man's spiritual resources. It is a division within himself in which his principles become hopelessly lost in exile servitude to his own ambitions, his selfishness, and his tyranny. The diaspora then represents the good in man, broken up, scattered throughout the world, to spring up here and there and elsewhere, but to be forever in exile, to be ever under the tyranny of false monarchs and of foreign kings and rulers. It is the evidence that in man and in the great community of man there is that chosen goodness, that spiritual electness, locked within the human heart, locked within the pattern of selfishness and self-centeredness with which we have tried to satisfy our religious and our material requirements. Thus the diaspora is, of course, something that is the final punishment of the selfish man, that he must be alone, that he must be in exile. For as the prophet himself points out, the end of the evil man is that he must be alone. He must endure himself. And this is the heaviest punishment that flesh can bear. This is why the ignorant and the foolish, the selfish, do not like to be alone. That they fear their own company even more than they fear the condemnations of their fellow men. So out of the loneliness of ignorance, men must come back again to the fraternity of wisdom and truth. And I think there is considerable to be said here in connection with the use of the term wisdom, as we find it in the Catechism and in many other of the Jewish writings. Wisdom in this sense does not mean what we use today as wisdom. It does not mean great learning of the mind or great scholastic attainment. Such things were not even available in those days. Wisdom meant more to these people that innate sense of realities, which we find still among the primitive peoples and among the simple directness of those who are simply good. Wisdom is therefore the inner insight which impels the individual to live well. Wisdom is an understanding in the heart by which the person is called to his natural destiny, called to the fulfillment of his own spiritual purpose, and in the fulfilling of it, called to the service of the people. Citizenship, as in most other ancient nations, implies among these people a sharing in a burden. It was not something that was something that bestowed privilege. It bestowed duty. It made the individual a mature part of society, on the ground that every mature individual is responsible for the collective good of the order of life in which he lives. It is his duty, if necessary, to sacrifice himself completely to the perfection and maintenance of that better order. And it is his duty also to continue to build that order from within himself, and not by the accumulation of outward things alone. Thus, the Messianic dispensation is not a period in which men are suddenly relieved of their troubles. It is a period in which individuals who understand commune together in understanding. Therefore, the beginning of the Messianic dispensation is when two persons can share their realities together. There can be no dispensation without sharing. The dispensation is not what either one of them possesses. The dispensation is that which comes in the sharing and is brought into existence by the mingling and the union of dedicated and enlightened lives. Thus the dispensation is not born by men, the dispensation is not carried by individuals, but by their association with each other. Pythagoras points this out on an astronomical level in his discussion of the music of the spheres. He says music is not caused by the motion of the planets, but by the intervals between them. Thus, music, harmony, or inharmony in society is not due to the bodies of society, but to the relation of their intervals. And in this case, the interval is the distance between one person and another. The bridging of this interval with an harmonious accord creates the music of the spheres and also creates the concept of the earthly paradisio. Thus it comes into being as a result of union of lives. No one can bring it, no one can destroy it, but all may know it. In this concept, then, the Messianic mystery is the revelation of this relationship, of this integration which comes between dedicated lives. In the old Jewish beliefs, there is a teaching that children come into the world as a result of the overlapping of the magnetic fields of the parents. And as the order of the father and mother meet and overlap, there is a neutral zone created by this overlapping. And in this zone of quietude, the child is born. And this zone of peace, where positive and negative magnetic fields neutralize to form a perfect quietude, or a perfect peace of life. In this interval, the life itself is able to enter into manifestation, or to come through the great peace into objectivity. They have quite an elaborate doctrine relating to this, in various but here is the secret of their concept of the Messianic dispensation. Wherever two or more are gathered together in the name of truth, that truth shall abide in the midst of them, nor can it be absent. When two or more are gathered together in the name of God, God is strangely and mysteriously present. Not in either, but in the mingling of the two, in the union of the separated elements of a spiritual nature. Thus the Messiah, or the desire of all nations, is mysteriously brought into existence in the zone of the great peace which comes upon the congregation of Israel under the Messianic concept. Where these gather together in a great peace in their hearts, and their spiritual fires, like the Pentecostal flame, burn brightly in the mysterious inner atmosphere of the faith. They form of their own natures and of their own complete consecration a great zone of peace. And this great zone of peace is the Golden Age. It is the place where the millennium comes into existence. And it is in this zone of peace that the Messianic power of God is revealed to His people. Therefore, as the prophets have pointed out, the requirements of God in these matters are clear and simple. That wherever men shall worship in His name, they shall abide in peace one with another. For if they cannot be at peace with their brother whom they have seen, how can they be at peace with their God whom they have not seen? And that no man receives the dispensation. The great peace receives it. And this great peace is called the congregation. And later in Christendom, this congregation was represented by the ecclesia, or the assembly of the just and the devout. In the ancient symbolism of Apocalypse, we find it in the 24 elders who kneel before the throne above the great sea of glass, forming of themselves a circle of light. As you probably know, there has been considerable talk and discussion of the possibility of what has been called the British Israel movement. The idea that the British people are part of the lost tribes of Israel. There's been considerable discussion of that, and in the recent coronation of Queen Elizabeth, there was a revival of interest because of certain parts of that coronation ceremonial, which certainly goes back to the Melchizedekian rites, the anointing of the head with oil, the passing on of the strange power of kingship, seated on the throne with a stone of scorn, which was the pillar of Jacob, and all the mysterious symbolisms of this time. But perhaps this symbolism is even more apparent in the chapel of St. George of the Garter, which is one of the great orders of chivalry in England. In the ritual and ceremony of the Garter, it was practiced in its original form. The Knights of the Garter each had a throne in the chapel of St. George. Now these thrones were not the thrones of British monarchs, because over one of these thrones, even during the war, was hung the banner of the Mikado of Japan. Over another was the banner of the Shah of Persia. The Great Order of the Garter was composed, theoretically and originally, of all of the rulers of men, based upon the great books of Hermes on the deportment of kings. It was a very ancient and mysterious rite. And in the ceremony of the rite, there was a point at which the knights, each of whom carried the mysterious symbolical cruciform sword of the Garter, all stepped down from their thrones and formed a circle, and each one stretched forth the point of his sword and overlapped it with the points of the other swords, and out of the combination of these swords was suddenly formed a star of steel as a symbol of the union. And this star, of course, was the Star of David, and the star also associated with the Star of Bethlehem. It was the symbol of the union of these persons as a living power, producing out of their unity the symbol of the Messiah. This is whether it be the Solomonic symbol of the ancient Israel, the shield of David, or whether it is the five-pointed star associated with Bethlehem. The principle involved is that the great light is revealed by the union of lives. And this union of lives is the story of the Messianic dispensation, as it was understood and practiced by the Orthodox Jews. It is a concept which does not find its fulfillment necessarily through a Messiah, although Israel has sought one and waited one for a long time. But more completely, it is this power to create the Messiah. The power to bring together the spiritual resources of the people into one terrific focus. And through this focus, to prove marriage. To prove that the time for the return of the Shekinah's glory has come. To prove that even the Maseroth in their courses have predicted that this would occur. To prove that in the midst of this union of people, the Shekinah's glory will hover over Israel, and the secret God of Israel, the Archangel Michael, the Psychopos of heaven, would bring the power of the new age, the age of peace. Men must, therefore, unite to form this peace. The greater their union, the more perfect facade that is fashioned out of their own souls and out of their own consciousness. And these gathering together save not themselves necessarily, primarily, or even each other primarily. For their glory is to bear witness to the heavens and to the glory of the eternal God. Thus, through the creation of the Merkabah, which is the chariot of power, the mysterious Merkabah of Ezekiel's vision, the chariot drawn by the cherubim, this Merkabah, or the chariot of the eternal, is, of course, the Messianic tradition. This is the eternal city. This is the thing that is built by the secret power of dedication. It is created and maintained and perfected by man's recognition of his duty to God and not God's responsibility for him. That it is his right and privilege to release the eternal, to bear witness and to fashion the great day of the Messiah King. And when the Messiah King comes, will it be a person? Perhaps it will, perhaps it will not. Israel is not certain. But what will happen is that it will be the embodiment of the heart of Israel. For the Messiah King will be the living heart within the body of the new way of life. And from its great heart, this power which has been created out of Israel will have one life. It shall have one mind, which is the wisdom of the law. And it shall have one heart, which is the wisdom and the dispensation of the Messiah. And with one heart and one mind, Israel will be one people. Now this refers to their thinking, certainly, to the final union of all peoples, and the bringing together the wisdom of the ages and the perfection of the human being. And that is what the story has meant to me, and I hope that it will convey something of the Spirit to you, and then we will be ready to go on to another phase of it next week in our study of the great Solomonic cycle. With their lives for the duty which they felt to be theirs from heaven. The prophets usually descended by means of what is called anointing, and we will follow that thought a little later. Because you will remember that in the ancient ritual, Melchizedek, king of Salem, anointed the head, and in so doing bestowed the priesthood, bestowed the succession of divine authority. Thus we have the term anointing to mean the bestowal of the symbolic oil by which there was a baptism of the Spirit. In some instances, the prophets descended by this process of anointing, which parallels to at least a degree the general theme and concept of what Christendom calls the apostolic succession. It was a descent of prophets, a descent of divinely inspired persons, drawn and selected, often by their own predecessors, so that the prophet would choose one from among the people and bestow the power of prophecy upon him, lay his hands upon his head, and anoint him with oil, and dedicate him unto the living God. This we find also among ancient sects of other nations and among religious peoples generally. But in the case of the Jewish prophets, this descent of the prophetic power and this bestowal of the divine approval carried with it a powerful, forming political power, which is a little different from that which we generally observe. Usually the holy man departs from the world. Usually he reserves his prophecies and his mysticism for his disciples or those who are initiated into his sects or belong to the various schools in which he is associated. But the Jewish prophet was a man of action. He came out into the world and dared to hurl his reproaches even into the teeth of the king, even into the teeth of Solomon and David. And because of the tremendous moral power which the prophet had, particularly with the masses, it was very rare indeed that even the greatest of temporal rulers dared to go against the will of the prophet. Now the term anointed, which we find constantly in the Bible, also carries a two-pronged interpretation apart from this. Two classes of human beings were anointed. in the biblical period, or at least according to the biblical record. Anointing was an ordination, a setting aside under divine favor. It could be bestowed upon temporal rulers. Thus David was anointed and had great and wonderful authority because of this. Also, we have records in the Bible that the anointing, or the term anointing, was offered, or at least occasionally applied to non-Jewish people, because Cyrus, king of Persia, was referred to in the Bible as the anointed one. This is because of his peculiar charity and his kindly attitude toward the Jewish people, and the fact that through his liberation of the Jewish exiles, he was held to be fulfilling one of the prophecies, and therefore that he was the anointed of the Lord, or the hand through whom this fulfillment was to come about. In addition, therefore, to the religious group, there were these prophetic prophecies. They are prophecies that seem to stem very strongly from a subconscious recognition of cause and effect. There are a great many of us today, for instance, who will say, if certain things do not change, we must expect certain consequences. This, more or less, is the approach which we find in the Old Testament. It is not a case in which the prophet has announced some tribulation to a land or generation then unborn. The prophecies unfold, more or less, the fate of Israel, a fate closely linked to the conduct of Israel, and arising from the great Levitical foundations of Jewish law. In other words, the prophecies tell essentially what happens to the man who keeps the law and what happens to the man who breaks the law. And also what happens to a nation that keeps the law, or a nation that breaks the law. Efforts to try to associate these prophecies, therefore, with later historical events involving other races, other nations, and other times, represent a strong line of interpretation, which is not entirely justified by the context. This brings us to the next point that we have to make. Any fragment of material out of context loses the greater part of its essential meaning. For this reason, the tendency to pick out prophecies, or to try to assume that certain verses, certain chapters, or even certain books dealt with a particular event in some far time or distant place, has a tendency to lead to what might be considered an uncritical approach to the text. It may satisfy an instinct of fancy or imagination, or may seem to be useful in supporting or sustaining a belief or an opinion, but we cannot say from the context of the books themselves that we have the right to assume that such was their original intention. More completely, we are more or less required to face the fact that these fragments belong to a distinct internal pattern, and that this pattern is very closely connected, hopelessly interwoven in the faith and development of the Jewish people. Recognizing the dates from the 8th century B.C. to the 2nd century, we realize that this period closely agrees with what might be termed the Great Tribulation of Israel. During this time, the people were under tremendous political strength. They were subjected to numerous indignities as a nation and a people. They watched the gradual collapse of the institution which had been built up upon the tremendous intensity of the Mosaic dispensation. They saw something which was of the deepest and most terrible concern to their hearts and souls, and we pray that we may never see the same thing in our time, in our day, or in the days to come. These people were firmly convinced that they were a good, and the people under the protection of a great and good God, and that this great and good all wise, and all sensible. The prophetic books of the Old Testament are scattered over a long historical period, from the 8th century B.C. to the beginning of the 3rd century B.C. These works, in other words, were not produced at one time, although the fundamental emphasis upon them and the springboard upon which most of them gradually developed was established in what is called the golden era of the prophetic writings of the Jews, which would be approximately the 8th century B.C. Thus we begin with the earliest books, finding such works as Amos and Hosea, certain parts of Isaiah and Micah. And we go on down through to the last of the prophetic books, which probably are Joel and Zechariah. Zechariah, by very content, could not have been written until not far in the beginning of the Christian era. Thus, the great span of the prophetic writings covers 600 to 700 years. And during this period of time, these writings pass through numerous modifications and changes. We should also note, in passing, that the earliest available manuscripts of the Jewish writings in Jewish already have the Masoretic point, or a comparatively recent form of diacritical markings, and do not date much earlier than the 9th century A.D. Prior to that time, we have only the great classical codices, most of which are in Greek. We do, however, have the Septuagint, the version of the 70, which is a very important earlier collection of biblical material dating from approximately the 3rd century B.C. But of course, this also is not available in its original in Hebrew. It comes to us along with the other translational sources of biblical material. We must, for a moment, try to define something of what the prophetic books are, what is meant by the word prophecy in this case. Here I think there's been a great deal of misconception. The prophetic books do not contain prophecies as we know or understand them. At least, if such are present, they are in a very small minority. The prophetic books have to do with one grand prophecy. And that prophecy is the restoration of Israel. Now, we will go into this a little later and try to show how this has implications. But for the moment, we can say that the prophecies of the prophetic books are much more on a moral level or on an ethical level than such prophecies and predictions as we would associate with Nostradamus or Mother Shipton or some of those whom we like to think predicted the future. The prophecies of the Old Testament are almost scientific prophecies. They were forced to face the gradual disintegration of their nations and their states. They were forced to confront the definite factual evidence that they were miserable, that they were lonely, that their material affairs did not go well, that their princes and leaders were not always good men, and that by degrees a terrible disaster, a great dilemma was descending upon them, a dilemma which had also been shouted to them by their prophets and religious leaders. So out of context, we cannot estimate this situation. We cannot estimate the loneliness of these people. We cannot estimate the slender thread upon which their spiritual conviction hung. We cannot realize how sorely they were tried and tempted to depart from what they regarded as the ways of righteousness. They could not and did not see the evident workings of a good God. They did not see that divine intercession and protection for their people. They saw rather the structure which they had and their ancestors had built up slowly crumbling, gnawed away by the pagan world around them. Thus, in these prophecies, we find not only the stories of a people, and we find not only the message of God-inspired men, but we also see something of the humanity of the prophets. We see them as particularly in the case of Jeremiah. We see a man struggling against his own unbelief. We see him trying to prove to himself first that this great spiritual dispensation was true. He had to fight this out. He had to look around him and see evil men flourish and good men punished. He had to see the law-abiding citizen impoverished and the deceitful and dishonest man flourish like the green bay tree. He had to, in some way, revive, restate, and restore his own faith. He had to find his God in the wilderness and darkness of an uncertain time. It is not only in Jeremiah, but especially in this prophet, that we contact this tremendous internal struggle. We find it present in nearly all of the prophetic books, sometimes alternated with great moments of exaltation, until we dimly perceive human souls striving for their faith, struggling to keep their inner sense of the rightness of things. And also we see these old prophets inevitably assuming that their fellow countrymen were like themselves, under the same stress and the same strain and the same internal pressure. Thus the prophets are not only seeking to find this security in their own hearts for themselves, but when they find it, it flows out of them as a tremendous benediction to help those of lesser faith, to help to restore the realization of the essential nature of the great law, particularly the great Levitical statute. This is entirely based. For the prophetic words stand upon the strong foundation of the penalty, of the revealed law, as it was given by the great lawmakers in the 5 historical and genealogical books attributed to Moses. This then causes us to make another little pause, which is essential to our picture, and that is to try to distinguish what the old Jewish people meant by a prophet. Now, this is a little more complicated than first appears. In the theistic system, political and religious, there was an element which is almost unique. Perhaps we should not say it is truly unique, because there are parallels to it in Eastern traditions. But certainly it is more peculiarly and remarkably emphasized in the Old Testament writings than in most of the other books. And this is the place of the prophet, not only the religious, but non-religious structure of his society. Perhaps it is easier to assume for a moment that in Judaism there is no clear distinction between religion and the non-religious structure of society. This may be formally true, but it is not factually true in experience. Actually, the leaders, both religious and temporal, had followings belonging to what you might term a laity, and these followings constituted the citizenship in comparison to leadership. The prophet was an individual upon whom the hand of God had rested. He had a unique position, and a good example is Samuel, who held in his own hand the power to make and unmake kings. The prophet was unique. The prophet was a person of heart. He was a person under the peculiar and wonderful protection of God. And it is interesting to note that in the very earliest writings, the name for this prophetic type of life was a very strange term which implied ecstasy and also madness. Now, among strange primitive people, we know that the mad are always regarded as under the protection of God. We know, for instance, that the epileptic was so also considered in the medieval world because of the strange attacks which came upon him. And therefore, epilepsy was called a divine disease, the disease given by the gods. In a strange way, prophecy was a kind of a divine mania. It was something that all men could not have. It was something that set them apart and caused the presence of God to be strangely with them. This union between the prophet and his God gave him a strange aura of protection. He was almost immune to the vicissitudes of the world in which he lived. And it was his peculiar duty and responsibility to thunder out his warnings, his pleadings, always speaking as though speaking with the voice of the God of Israel. Thus the prophet, for the most part, was a protected man, protected for the strange destiny which set him apart and conferred upon him some wonderful internal power. But there were periods in Jewish history when it went hard upon prophets, and there are many of them that say that their happiness and